Roth, principal and founder of Montgomery Roth, and Steve Sherman, who's the director of design at Weston. Each of our panelists is going to be talking about one of the five senses. I'm going to start with vision. And basically the idea is to come up with some new thoughts on the five senses and brand perception.
And no matter who is in this room, if you're sitting with somebody and you come here to have a drink, or you come here for this particular event, you're going to have more trouble hearing because the noise ceiling in this room is so incredibly high. And everything you do has to compete against that. So from just a perceptual standpoint, this type of thing, when I come into a room, I just feel like I'm already at a point where I have to kind of start to yell.
So how we think about experience, we need to stimulate as many senses as possible because we want to affect different areas of the brain, right? There's a woman I know who actually has an abnormal number of taste buds in her tongue, and she's a professional chocolate taster. Isn't that a great job?
All of those senses are so important in everything that we do when we design spaces and developing resorts and casinos and restaurants. And it's very important that we have to always remember that all the five senses are important. They always play a role in experience all of our guests in our facilities.
Unlike on the other senses that have been discussed today, you can discover sight by walking through. You can discover a scent by experiencing, and many of the hotels here in Las Vegas and elsewhere. Touch is an interactive thing. Scent, all the other ones. Tasting. The way that I look at it is it's intrusive branding or intrusive marketing. Unless you physically put something in your mouth, obviously you're not going to taste it. How do we get to cross that line?
When we look at things, we tend to scan. I mean, society has become very used to scanning for things that we're looking for. And so we're either seeking something out, or if something catches our attention, we often stop and either buy or take part in a service.
I mean, touch to me is more like truth. It's very hard for me to take any material or take anything you might touch and actually manipulate it to an extent where one person's going to think it's one thing and another person's going to have a completely different perception of it. The other interesting thing about touch and all of our senses is probably the one sense that has little to no variation from one person to another, as opposed to sight and sound and obviously hearing.
What do you want them to feel? What do you want them to think when they hear it? You know, hearing and trying to define what hearing is and sound is to me about the most ephemeral of the type of senses, because we have things to define it. We have a thing called a decibel. But it's an abstract term to most people. And that a decibel, as most of you know, defines loudness. But when we start to define loudness, most people are more comfortable saying it's too loud, it's too small. I can't hear it, can you make it louder? The person next to you is saying it's way too loud, turn it down. I don't like that. So technology starts to bring something into this, but essentially it is really an ephemeral art that in most instances gets left to the end.
Introduction of a taste. Now, like a rite of passage, for example. The first time when we were children and you have a sip of your dad's wine or your dad's beer. Pretty bad, right? I mean, unless you're from my family. Yeah, you know, the first impression is like, ew, that's icky. Yeah, I don't like that. But what do your parents say? Or same thing with, say, vegetables and things of that nature that you don't want to taste when you're a kid. You'll grow to like it. You'll acquire a taste for it.
And just this week, on one given day, over 6,000 people turned 60 in the United States of America. And with that, they were also saying that because of the heavy metal contingent, you know, a lot of Americans are really losing their sense of hearing. And so, you know, you have to ask yourself, what other senses might we lose? Even though this generation has constantly sought out the quest for eternal youth.
Tucson, there's definitely this transition from the outside world that happens to people when you land in the desert. You got these cacti, you know, popping up around you. You know you're not in Kansas anymore. You suddenly go, wow, and then you sort of step into this place, this portal, and you experience sort of this transitional moment You open yourself up to sort of a change space, okay? This is sort of the same psychological, I guess, sequencing that happens in many ways. And then once you enter this change space, you have this aha moment, and then you have this celebratory sequence. Now this happens a lot with people at Canyon Ranch. And the more that we can reinforce the physical environment to do that, to help embrace this and carry people through it, the more powerful their experience is going to be. And to do that is really just triggering all of these different sensory spaces.
Because in the modern day and age, we expect that a musical sounds like a CD or a DVD. We don't expect there to be a great deal of timbre or a great deal of variance in the music. It wants to sound like what you get on your headphones, because that's what we accept. That's what the younger generation, I hate to say that, accepts as being a quality of music.
Tactile spaces make for a different kind of environment, a different comfort level in each kind of space.
Talking about this discussion, and we talked about taste, and she said it was just after Easter Sunday. She had just spent a trip down to Philadelphia to see her grandmother, and she said when she was in the train station, she remembered this small candy shop from when she was a little girl. Well, the venue has since gone, but there was somebody that was selling these similar candies that she remembers as a kid. She said she got on the train, opened this little package, and popped this like buttercream egg in her mouth, and she said she was instantly a little girl again, and that flavor just brought her right back to that experience of being with her grandmother, and such a warm and wonderful sensation. A sense memory.
Because whether we call it a brand or whether we call it a show, there has to be a concept that can be, that basically you can tell somebody and be very clear about it. Once we know what the concept is, you can tie it into music, you can tie it into audio, you can tie it into anything else. And when you combine those two things together, and they seem to be inextricably linked, and you can't think of one without the other, then you have essentially a successful combination of perception and brand.
Some people have, maybe some deficiencies in some of the senses, but there are other senses that make up for it. So it's so important for when we're designing and we're creating spaces that we really stimulate all these senses.
Well, I hope today we can open up a discussion and talk about all the senses, I think, and how they play together. It's really hard to talk about one without really experiencing all of them and to talking about them together.
That as a person in the theater, we like everything really quiet. And why do we like it quiet? Because it's like a blank piece of paper. You can build on it, you can draw whatever you want. But if you start with this, somebody's already scribbled on the paper, and you've got nowhere to go.
Taste and design, visual design, that sort of thing. I was reminded of the first generation of the Willy Wonka film. You guys remember that with Gene Wilder? Okay. There was a scene when the children, those wonderful children, they walk down the hallway and he talks about, must show you this, lickable wallpaper. And the kids start licking. He says, lick a banana, it tastes like a banana. Lick a raspberry, it tastes like a raspberry. Lick a snozberry, it tastes like a snozberry. And Veruca Salt says, snozberry? There's no such thing as a snozberry. And he grabs her face and he says, we are the music makers and we are the dreamers of the dream. And that's kind of what I think would sum up what this whole thing is in terms of we are the music makers, we are the brand developing people. So if we're using taste as a tool and all these other senses for that tool, for those tools, more power to us.
What you're going to be seeing over the next 25 years or so is a redefinition, a re-education of what is beauty. And along with that, I think that there's some areas where, if you're looking at a group of people that are spending over $2 trillion a year, $2 trillion a year, if you have a product or service to offer these people, my guess is, it's going to be a pretty lucrative business. Additionally, because they haven't found this fountain of youth, there is really they can augment the idea of losing some of the senses, but in reality, we're going to have to challenge ourselves as designers and architects and brand developers to really think beyond just the visual and go beyond that.